Georgette joins Tropical Storm Frank in the Eastern Pacific. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 28th. So we now have not one but two tropical storms in the Eastern Pacific, which is sort of going against the script here. We're expecting it to be the quietest basin this year, most likely. It's turning out to be the most active so far, but it is still very early in the year. We've received our 38th storm of the year in the form of Georgette. It's day 58 in the Atlantic, and there's still no forthcoming areas of interest, so it's a bit of a shoddy start in the Atlantic when all is said and done. It is below average, even factoring in the time of year. In terms of ACE, it's 2.8 versus 9.3, the average. In the Eastern Pacific, though, it's overperforming right now on day 75 of hurricane season. It's about 1.5 times as busy as it should be in a normal season so far this year. Frank and Georgette are no threat to land. They'll both move out to sea. In the Western Pacific, though, we have an 80% chance now on this broad disturbance that the JMA have now marked as a tropical depression, and that is likely to become our next Western Pacific tropical cyclone, although its future is very much uncertain. And in the South Indian Ocean, we've still got that area of interest fighting back, and it is fighting towards tropical cyclone status. A few models now on board with this, and we're giving it a 50% chance, mainly due to uncertainty. If it wasn't so off-season, we'd probably go higher. Let's take a look at some satellite imagery today then. The Atlantic, there's two significant blow-ups of thunderstorms and convection in the Gulf of Mexico, one over the Yucatan, and a slight bit of rotation off the US East Coast, but I can assure you it's not going to become anything, just an interesting little feature. Dry air dominating the ocean. In the Eastern Pacific, you can quite clearly see little and large here. Georgette forming rather surprisingly, although it was looking good for a couple of days before it formed, and Frank there doing its own thing, still fighting wind shear by the looks of things, and has blown up quite a lot on the southern side, but pretty much twice the size of its partner. And here they are on the latest visible satellite imagery, and get a closer look at them both. And Georgette, to be honest with you, is pretty tiny when you look at that visible imagery particularly. When you look at Frank, it's an average size small, even possibly slightly smaller than average. Georgette really is minuscule compared to that, and you can see it slowly dragging on towards the west. It's not going to live very long, so we think. I mean, models are killing it off pretty quickly. The National Hurricane Center does have a full 5-day forecast for it as a tropical storm. It's going to be interesting to see if that does happen, how these storms might interact. I can guarantee you that if Georgette does survive, that Frank's progress will be restricted. In the Western Pacific, you can see quite clearly this potential tropical cyclone developing, extremely broad though, and models are showing it gyrating around a common large, extra large low pressure area in the Philippine Sea. It's going to be humongous, and the storm, if it forms, will be trailing around the northern edge of it through the Ryukyu Islands and then towards the East China Sea. Southern Indian Ocean, you can see down there that potential tropical cyclone trying to get its way. It's not looking great right now in terms of its center of circulation because it doesn't yet have one, but there is still time for it, and the model is suggesting that it'll have the best chance in about a day or two. Elsewhere in the southern hemisphere, it's fairly quiet right now, with a few thunderstorms blowing up along a frontal system through the Solomon Islands and towards Vanuatu, but elsewhere it is very quiet in the southern hemisphere right now. So then you can see both current storms overlaid on our sea surface temperature chart. I've remembered the names this time, unlike last night, Frank and Georgette, and you can see that they're both in decent sea surface temperatures, around 28 degrees for both of them. Georgette pretty much near the edge of a bit of a cliff there, where sea surface temperatures will drop off very quickly. The Atlantic warming up quite nicely as usual. The Gulf of Mexico there, 30 degrees quite easily over more than half of that sub-region, and in the Western Atlantic, temperatures looking very good as well. Indian Ocean is always prime. Bay of Bengal, of course, doesn't really get activity at this time of year. Southern Indian Ocean doesn't either, but if this does happen, that would be a bit of a rarity. It does happen sometimes, but sea surface temperatures there right now around 28 degrees. Is that the isotherm there? I think it is. So decently warm. Western Pacific very warm, 30 degrees plus in a lot of locations. All the area where that potential storm will be tracking through will be at least 28 degrees. Into the East China Sea, 30 degrees. So it may have a chance of development through there, as the GFS is hinting at. You can see there as well just how above average it is in that area in particular off the coast of China. So that could aid formation. Eastern Pacific is generally above average, and the Atlantic is generally above average as well, apart from the subtropical open ocean. The Gulf of Mexico looking good. Oceanic heat content continues to build in the Caribbean Sea. Gulf of Mexico there piping hot in the eastern area, the loop current, and on the Gulf Stream there looking pretty good too. Eastern Pacific is starting up just a little bit more, and we were making fun of the Eastern Pacific for a long time, but honestly it is way ahead of where it should be for the time of year. So who knows what we'll see this year if it keeps going like this. Let's check some computer models then for some potential answers. GFS is not keen on Georgette lasting very long at all, and that allows Frank to intensify much more substantially. If Georgette does survive, then Frank will certainly not strengthen that much because some of its energy will be robbed by the competing storm. You can see it there though in the GFS scenario. If Georgette dies off within about 24 hours according to that, Frank goes on and becomes at least a category 2 there, headed off towards the northwest, broadens out a lot as it absorbs Georgette's energy, and then eventually moving further out. We don't get to see the end just yet. Here's the Western Pacific system. You can see it rotating around an enormous low pressure system when you look closely. It's all rotating around. It must be about not 2,000 but maybe 1,000 miles wide there. Absolutely enormous. The storm itself though is only filtering around the top end of it, and it's a fairly small system if it does get going properly. And once again it's showing that stalling motion just off Shanghai, and that's probably due to poor steering, or weak steering that is. It could still sail further east or make a more committed landfall in China. Anyway, looking at the southern Indian Ocean, you can see there from the GFS that it gives this system a chance at that early part of that model run. Let's look again here. You can see it there, some rotation. It just about manages tropical storm status there on day 2. The other models, ECMWF most notably, pretty much on board with that as well. CMC also with it. So that's going to be interesting. Now let's check the precipitation from the potential Western Pacific storms. It's the most threatening to land. Yesterday we were talking about maybe 5 or more inches over land areas. It's not looking so severe today when we look at these rainfall amounts. Most of it is out at sea, although part or all of the storm's energy will be expended into the Korean Peninsula later on by the looks of things, at least in this scenario, which obviously could change. And you can see those red areas up there of over 10 inches in 1 or 2 locations in the far northern part of the Korean Peninsula. Looking at the longer range, you can take a look once again at Frank there, persisting for a little bit longer, and quite far northwest of a track there actually. A little bit surprising to see it creeping up towards the latitude of San Diego. Didn't quite get there, but that's Frank, and at the very end of that loop you might see another tropical cyclone try to form at a much lower latitude, a very low latitude actually, to take one extreme to another. There it is, some energy there trying to develop. There it is, trying to become a tropical cyclone. There's another system behind, or the tail of the Western Pacific system, and then around the 4th or the 5th of August, GFS is suggesting in the longer range that we might see another typhoon, and not just a small one, a pretty darn strong one when you look at that imagery. But this is the GFS at longer range, that's day 9 and 10. I wouldn't give much credence to that at all just yet, because it can just throw it away at a moment's notice. That's all the serious stuff done. At this point I can tell you about the Force 13 store. You can scan that barcode on your screen and it will take you straight to our store page where you can take a look at our latest merch products and all the gizmos that we have there, including our Still Waiting for Hone t-shirt, which I guess will be plugged until Hone forms, so get on with it, Hone. And in Scilly range, this system eventually forms. That's not Hone, by the way, that's still east of 140 west, but it does move into the Central Pacific and looks like they're another Eastern Pacific storm becoming a hurricane. You know, if this turns out to be true, the Eastern Pacific will remain well ahead of the average in terms of activity, and in a season where it was expected to completely flop, and oceanic heat content certainly supported that, this season might really be making a go of it if we see those two storms verify as well. And in the Western Pacific, that strong typhoon still making a go of it towards China this time. It had a Taiwanese landfall in yesterday's update, but a very strong landfall there around August 7th or 8th, I think it was. Still a very long way out, and a very large monsoonal type cyclone there in the very late range of that run. There it is again, August 8th, that landfall, if it were to happen, so mark your diaries for another potential GFS fail, but you never know, at this time of year things like that can happen. Well, let's take a look on this day to July 28th, 1996, and we had quite a busy tropics. Hurricane Cesar was making landfall in Nicaragua as a Category 1. Quite a historic storm that was, and it got its other name on the other side. It would become Cesar Douglas. And in the Western Pacific, we had Typhoon Herb reaching Category 4 status, which it would hold on to for quite some time, and strengthen even more later on. Great appearance as it approached Taiwan, and then curved round towards the north of Taiwan and weakened substantially. Gloria was weakening as a depression, and 11W was just forming out there as well. So back to today, and the next name on the Atlantic naming list is Danielle. If the Eastern Pacific finds another storm to form in the next 24 hours to make it 3 in a row, it would be Howard, but it won't. And in the Central Pacific, we're still waiting for Hone. In the Western Pacific, Songda might be upon us, we'll see. In the North Indian Ocean, the next name is Sitrang. Fascinating to see that we've reached 2 tropical storms in 2 days on our bulletins, and it could be another one tomorrow. In the Australian region, the next name is Darian, the Southwest Indian Ocean, Ashley, and in the South Pacific, the next name is Harley. We'll have another tropical weather bulletin tomorrow night.